Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing my May wrap-up. May was actually a really good reading month for me because I read quite a few books. I think I read 7 books, and I really liked the majority of the books that I read, which is great because for the past couple of months I haven't really been liking a lot of the books I've read, but May was like real good. So I'm excited to tell you about what I read. The first book that I read in May is Torn by Rowena Miller. This is a fantasy book that I believe is her debut novel. We follow the main character Sophie, who is a seamstress and dressmaker, but also a charm caster. So she is able to sew charms and spells into the clothing that she makes. This is a talent that only she has perfected. Other people are able to cast charms, but they have not been able to put them into clothing and fabric for people to wear on them all the time. So this is how Sophie is making her business. She's trying to make her way in the world by being a seamstress who can also sew charms into your clothing. We're following her just as she is starting to make headway and starting to make a name for herself as a seamstress, both for her designs and for her charm casting. And she's beginning to make inroads into the world of the nobility. But her brother is a revolutionary. He does not believe in having the stratification between the nobility and the common people, and he is willing to start a revolution to change the world that they live in. And this, of course, creates tension between Sophie and her brother. Sophie is much more of the mind of keep your head down, work hard, and just work within the system to do the best you can. And she is starting to have some success, so she's very protective of what little success she has made. Whereas her brother doesn't believe that they should have to work within this unfair system, and he wants to completely destroy it as it is so that they can live in a more system overall. He is much more idealistic. So this one, I have a full review on my channel that I will link below if you would like to hear more extensively my thoughts about it. But briefly, I did enjoy this book. It had some ups and downs for me. I think there were some parts that were done really well. I think the world was really interesting. It was a more political story than I was expecting, and I liked the way that they did it. It was a good amount of incorporating politics, but not making them too heavy. I think politics in fantasy can be interesting, but sometimes they get a little too heavy or a little too in-depth for me, and I kind of start zoning out. So I thought this had a pretty good balance. I also thought that Sophie, our main character's perspective, was especially interesting because her family are actually immigrants to this country that they're living in, and so she had some interesting inner turmoil of identity and her self-concept and how she relates to the country that she lives in and the society that they have, but then also the culture that her family comes from. And that kind of conflict of like her inner identity I thought was very interesting. Maybe not the most nuanced or complex, but I thought it was interesting, and I enjoyed that it was incorporated to some extent into the story. One aspect of the story though that I did not really like was the insta-love. There was definitely insta-love in it, and that really brought down my enjoyment of the book. So I think that it definitely had some highs and some lows. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars because I did enjoy it. It just had some things that irked me. The next book that I read was a childhood reread, which is The Secret of Platform 13 by Eva Abatson. This one, I have been thinking about this book for years. There is this little creature in this book that is called a mist maker. Yeah, it's called a mist maker that has been in the back of my mind for years. Every once in a while I think of it. It's these little fluffy white creatures that when you like sing to them, it just makes them so happy that they just sigh, and when they sigh, mist comes out of their mouth, and then you can like use that mist to hide in. When I was little, I thought that was like the cutest animal and also a genius idea. So I was really excited when I found this book in a used bookstore, and I wanted to give it a reread. This is about a hidden island that has a portal which comes out on platform 13 in a train station. This portal that opens between the magical island and the train station only opens every 9 years. As time has gone on, this island has become more and more reclusive, and they try to hide from the world around them, which is why they use the the Mistmakers. This island is full of different magical creatures, and on the island, the king and queen just recently had a baby, so now the island has a little prince, and they're all very excited about it. Very soon after the new prince is born, this portal opens again, and through a series of accidents, the prince ends up on the other side of the portal in our world, and he isn't able to be found before the portal closes again. This story takes place 9 years after that, when the portal finally opens again and they can go searching for the young prince. So they send out a small team of magical people and magical creatures to find the prince and bring him back. So this one, as I said, is one that I listened to the audiobook as a child, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it again. It's very cute. It's a very cute, like, young reader kind of story. The story is adorable, the characters are cute, it has Mistmakers in it, which just like, I'm so glad that I finally figured out what book those were from, and that I got to read about them again because they are adorable and I want one. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It was just very fun to read and a good little, trip down memory lane. Next, I read Spellbook of the Lost and Found by Moira Fowley-Doyle. This is one that's been sitting on my shelf for a very long time, and I finally got around to it. Very glad that I did. This takes place in modern-day Ireland in a small town. We follow 3 groups of friends, so we end up with like 8 main characters, so it's quite a few main characters in this. But as I said, there are 3 groups of friends, and we follow each of them right after an annual bonfire that the town has every year. But during this bonfire, someone secretly cast a spell to find what has been lost. They found a spell book that is called the Spellbook of the Lost and Found, and cast the spell to find what has been lost, but they didn't realize that when you cast a spell to find what has been lost, you must sacrifice something in return, and you don't always have control over what is sacrificed in return. So after they cast the spell, things start going missing, not just from the people who cast it, but all around the town. And it starts off small, like people losing hair clips or a shoe here or there, but eventually it escalates and people start going missing too. So we're following these characters as they're realizing the consequences of what they have done, as they are finding that more and more things are going missing and the consequences are escalating over time, and they're trying to figure out how to undo what they have done, how to find the things that have been lost that they were not willing to sacrifice, and how to save themselves and the town and the people who are going missing. This is another one that I have a full review on my channel that I will link below if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, but here I will do a quick review of what I thought. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I loved the writing and the atmosphere of it. I think that the characters were not necessarily the strongest part of the story for this one. I did enjoy them and I wanted to know what happened to all of them, but I didn't have that like really emotional connection to them. But really, the writing and the atmosphere of this book is what I loved so much and what really kept me coming back. I read this one pretty quickly because I really felt like I just couldn't put it down. I loved being in this world, even though it's our world, but it had this wonderful, like beautiful, magical, but also really eerie and haunting kind of feeling to it, an atmosphere to it that I loved. This one, when I was reading it, it kind of gave me the Raven Cycle vibes a little bit. I don't think it was maybe as good as the Raven Cycle, partially because the characters aren't as like just deeply lovable as those, but in terms of writing and atmosphere, it reminded me a little bit of that because it had that more whimsical and beautiful writing with a kind of creepy, eerie, magical atmosphere, and it was great. I loved reading it. Overall, I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really loved it, and this was probably my favorite book that I read in May. Next up, I read the last 2 books in a series. So I read A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab and A Conjuring of Light, also by V.E. Schwab. A Gathering of Shadows is the second book in her Shades of Magic series. This takes place in the parallel worlds of 4 Londons. There is Red London that has lots of magic, Grey London that has no magic, White London that is being drained of magic, and Black London that has been destroyed by magic. You used to be able to travel between all of these worlds through doors, but now the doors have been closed to protect protect them from whatever destroyed Black London. The only people who can still travel between them are the Antari, who are blood mages, which one of our main characters is an Antari. That's about all the synopsis that I can probably give for these, because these are the second and third book in the series, so I don't want to give away too many spoilers or anything. I probably will be doing a spoilery discussion video about these because I have a lot of things to say. A Gathering of Shadows was probably actually my least favorite in the series. It very much felt like a filler story. It kind of follows like a tournament that's going on. The story, like, nothing moved forward until the last 50 to 100 pages of the book. So the majority of this like 500 page book was kind of pointless to me, I thought. I don't know. Because like the story, it doesn't move forward the story at all, pretty much. And we don't really, it doesn't move forward character development either. We get a lot of face time with the characters, so we get to see a lot of them, but we're just kind of like watching them do stuff. It's not really like learning more about them or becoming more attached to them. One thing though that I did really love about this is the opening scene of this book was great. While I was reading it, I could like see it in my mind. It seemed like something out of like Pirates of the Caribbean. I was like, this, I can see it like I'm watching a movie, and I thought that was really, really cool. So in terms of the writing, I thought it was really well done, especially for that opening scene. It was like so awesome, and I was like, this is amazing. Overall, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I mean, I enjoy V.E. Schwab's writing and her stories, her characters, all of that. I just feel like this one could have been better, or it just could have been omitted and the series would have been stronger just as a duology maybe. Then of course I read A Conjuring of Light, also by V.E. Schwab, which is the last book. As I said, this series is very addictive. So my original plan was that I was going to read A Gathering of Shadows, then, you know, read something else in between to give myself a little rest because these books are pretty intense, and then I was going to read A Conjuring of Light. That didn't happen. I went straight from A Gathering of Shadows into A Conjuring of Light because I was really addicted to it. Even if A Gathering of Shadows wasn't my favorite and I felt like it was kind of a filler, I still felt like I need to know what happens. I need to keep reading. I need to be in this world. So I read A Conjuring of Light, which I felt like really more got back into the plot, like the actual plot of the story that was started in the first book. This one really got back into that. This was probably my favorite book of the series because I think we get a lot more character development in it. We also get to learn a lot more about some of these side characters, and they become much more like main characters. We learn more about their backstories, about their relationships, about who they are as a person, what their experiences have been that have formed them, all of this stuff. And I really loved that. I also think that part of what I liked about this is that we get to know more about those side characters, so like Rye and Alucard and Holland, because I don't actually like Kel and Lila that much. The two of them kind of annoy me, and they were less frustrating in this one, but I think that's because they got less, you know, page time in this, that we saw a lot more about those side characters, and I really like the side characters better, so I enjoyed this a lot more. Anyway, I really enjoyed this one. It was my favorite out of the series, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Streets of Nottingham by Auckley Simwinga, and I'm very sorry if I am mispronouncing that. I'm not quite sure how to say it, so I'm sorry if I'm saying it incorrectly. This one is a little novella that I recently hauled. It takes place in like a magical post-apocalyptic world where the gods are very much present. So pretty much there was an event that was called like the Breaking or something, and it was an apocalypse. Everything was destroyed except for this one little town. Our main character, Adam, lives in this town. One day, these weird wraith-like creatures appear, which actually sounded a lot like Dementors. But these wraiths appear and attack the town, and many people are injured. The girl that Adam is in love with is injured, and that sets Adam off on an adventure to find Nottingham, to find her a healer. There is a myth about this city called Nottingham where a healer lives who is able to heal anything, but it also warns that no one is ever able to actually get to Nottingham. No one can ever find Nottingham because it is this magical place. But Adam is convinced that he can find Nottingham, that he can find this magical healer and bring them back to heal his love. This one, I actually read this book twice because the first time that I read it, I was incredibly confused and then forgot everything because I was so tired. I read this on a day that I hadn't been able to sleep the night before. I had barely any sleep. My brain just wasn't working. The second time I read it, I thought it was okay. I feel like this was an interesting idea. I feel like the author had a full world in his mind, but I feel like we needed more world building. And I know this is a novella, so we don't necessarily get a lot of world building. There are also a lot of time jumps in this that were a little hard to follow. It felt a little disjointed to me, and the main character would have these like visions and hallucinations that were not explained. I don't know why he would have these visions, so that was confusing. I wish I had more understanding of like how the magic worked, or like, did he have magic? Why was he having visions? I don't know. There were a lot of pieces in this that I just really felt like I wasn't anchored in this story or world. And so I thought that it had some good ideas and it sounded like a really interesting premise, and from what I could figure out, it sounded like an interesting world with an interesting like culture and gods and all of this. I just really wanted more world building and more structure and more like just anchoring me in what was happening and where we were. So for this one, I actually didn't give it a rating because after reading it, I was kind of like, I just didn't know what to rate it. But it was interesting and had some potential, but it didn't feel fleshed out enough or really polished or complete. And the last book that I read in May was The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. This was actually an audiobook that I listened to. I have just recently started getting back into audiobooks. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I like that I can listen to them while I'm doing other things and stuff like that. So The Darkest Part of the Forest is a contemporary fantasy that takes place in a small town that is known for having magical things happen. They're known for being very close to the fairies or the fae, and that tourists come to kind of experience magic, and they don't always realize that the fairies and the fae are not always nice. They're not always cute and pretty, that they are dark and mischievous and sometimes very cruel. And so sometimes tourists go missing or terrible things happen to them. This town even has a sleeping horned fairy who sleeps in a clear glass coffin in the forest, so tourists can go visit him, that he has been sleeping there for generations. He is unearthly beautiful and he has large horns on his head. The story follows two main characters, a brother and sister. We mainly follow the sister Hazel from her perspective, but both of them have grown up in this town. Both of them love the sleeping boy. One day, the boy in the coffin wakes up and disappears, and that really starts off this whole adventure that they have as they try to figure out who released him, where he is, why he was asleep, why he woke up, and then also why there is a monster in the center of the forest who has suddenly woken and is coming after the people of the town. So this book I did really enjoy. I thought it was very dark and creepy. I have never read a Holly Black book before, and she's kind of known as like writing the best like fairy stories and fae stories. This story was actually more dark and like violent than I was expecting it to be, but I really enjoyed it. I thought that this kind of like earthy fae magic was incorporated really well into the story and the characters and everything, so I really liked that. I also thought that there was like a really good amount of romance in the story. There was a little bit, but not too much. So I thought this one had a really good balance, just enough romance that it was really enjoyable, but not so much that I was like, look, we have other things to think about. I also really enjoyed the main character, Hazel, that she is really a warrior kind of person, that she has this very strong spirit. She can also be very violent and intense and like a little bloodthirsty sometimes, but she balanced that with this strong desire to protect people. And so I really liked that about her character. Her character made some questionable choices sometimes, but they were understandable even if they weren't good choices. Just as a little warning, a dog does die in this book. That is something I always wish people would tell me if a dog dies in a book, just so I can be emotionally prepared. So now I am telling you, just be aware that that does happen. Overall, I really enjoyed listening to this book. I loved those kind of dark, gritty, earthy, magical, fae vibes that it had. I'm not sure if I would ever read it again, but I did really enjoy it and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So that is all for my May wrap up. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. I would love to hear about it. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!